image there.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We are so excited.
Super excited.
Oh,
Opportunity to meet with you and talk with you. Oh my goodness. I'm like, oh, so exciting.
oh, well, thank you for having me. Yeah, you all look so beautiful on the Zoom there.
Oh, it took a lot. It was a lot of steps.
My husband set this all up, and you are our very first guest that we're having for our book club. So it's such an honor, first of all, with all of your accolades. Congratulations on all of your success. We're so grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I love your shirts there.
Thank you. I'm going to send you one.
Yes, please do. I'll tell you my size off the Zoom.
Oh my God. How are you? First of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Actually, it's been a year we've shared the same year that everybody has, and I've been at home with two young women. My daughters who are 12 and 16, they're coming through it really beautifully. But I think for a lot of parents, it's suddenly like, we're doing all our jobs at once. Your mom, your teacher, you're all these other things that you always are, but you also like your work in the world. It's all done in the same place. But I mean, if there's a silver lining, is that we've gotten to really, my husband and I've gotten to spend a lot more time with our girls, probably a lot more time than they want to be spending with us.
Mm-hmm.
But we feel like we've gotten like a bonus year with them. So that's been really nice. I mean, there's also been a lot of sadness, like everybody else. We've lost people we love, but I think overall, like being with family and reconnecting and refocusing on certain things, has helped a little bit.
Yes, that's exactly where we are right now. We're actually in my parents' home. We had to relocate during this time, and we've been in LA for a year. We're based in New York, but we're in LA right now. And so I hear you. I understand exactly what you're saying. And our son is 2. So we're... Oh,
wow.
Yep.
You're a multi-generational household.
Yes, we are.
Like it was always, and yeah. That's beautiful, though, that you can all be together, because one of the things that I kept thinking about, like my mom and dad have both passed away, but they were living in New York and we were here. And I was thinking during this time, we would have to reconfigure our home, right? Otherwise you'd be so worried about them.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And especially in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like you can't go anywhere, and they just have to stay put
in the household.
And you don't know how, like, I didn't know how my godmother was getting groceries, or my grandmother was getting her groceries, and I didn't want her out or anything like that. So one of the things I ended up doing when I came back out here was I was the guy. I'm going grocery shopping for everybody in the family. Everybody give me their list, but if we were far away, we wouldn't have that opportunity. So that was one of the things that was a blessing, that we could that I could be there and be like, okay, you all stay put, especially since you're in the higher risk.
Yeah.
And
we do. We have a lot of older parents and grandparents. But I want to get to it because I'm just so excited. So this Everything Inside, your book, I mean, wow. I didn't know what to expect, honestly. So we're fiction readers, but we've never read anything like your stories, and they were so powerful. So first question that I have for you is, do you base your fiction on like historical events? Because I was seeing some connection there, and my husband's grandmother, she used to go to Haiti every year. And you can talk about that. She had, that was her mission, and she would come and she would bring everything that she learned back to the church that she has here, and we would donate, and it's huge for her. And when she's 90, 92 now.
I don't want to age her on the
podcast.
Yeah, you get in trouble for that.
Don't do that. when she stopped going, it was hard for her because that was her passion. So I just, in reading your stories, we kind of were reminded by everything that she would tell us. So I was just wondering if there was a connection there.
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm one of those writers that I need like an anchor in order to enter a story. And I need it to feel real for me before I can make it feel real for the reader. So I always start with a seed of truth, you know, something I might have heard and researched and looked into, and then I delve deeper into the emotional part of it. Like, and then I ask myself, oh, what if it turns out this way? But there's usually a you know, a kernel of truth, truth in terms of reality or actual events. So it's something that I look for, because I, you know, sometimes, you know, the fiction does take over at some point. Once you're in the story, it flows and it surprises you. But to get me started, I have to feel like this person I'm writing about is real. And often in that way, you borrow pieces of different people you know. Okay. You know, and I'm sure as your grandmother, when she went to Haiti, she met like what we would call characters, you know, caractère, like someone who's like just these people who mark you, who you just know you'll remember forever. And so when you're writing fiction, it's like that. You want those kinds of people and you want those kinds of memorable events. And then you put your own individual imagination, your own individual visions on those stories.
And so speaking of one individual event, there are two stories in the book that I said, I was reading and I was like, this is one encounter that really magnified and changed the whole course of their lives. So in 7 stories, it was this one encounter when they were 7 for a month, and it changed everything. And that was so big. I related to that story so much because I am a child of a military household. And so oftentimes I will meet someone and I don't know, I wouldn't know until later on that I changed their life, or they've changed my life, or I'm thinking about them. And so I was just thinking, with these stories, do you write them until they're finished? Or do you have a stop and go process? What's your writing process?
It is a stop and go process because it's a process of discovery. And often when you're writing about people, you know, characters, I often think of them as like when you meet people. There are people you meet, and in the moment you meet them, you're like, oh my goodness, it's like I've known this person my whole life.
Yes.
Right? And then it's like you've traveled all your journeys together, and you start finishing their sentences, and there are people with whom that's immediate. And so there are characters that are like that. And then there are others that you have to draw them out more, and it takes a little while for them to trust you, to become more attached to you. So, the characters for me in the 7 stories with the 2 friends is that I think we all have, like, when you look back at your childhood, you might have one remarkable teacher or one remarkable friend. And being from a military household, you just traveled through people's lives, right? And then you have to, and they travel through your life. But there's something, you mark somebody's journey in ways that sometimes you don't know. So for these 2 characters, they're almost like they floated through, and they were both fascinated by one another. And I think, especially with your experience, people must have seemed very exotic to you because they were very different. They lived very different lives than what you lived. And then there's a kind of intrigue that makes you want to know someone, especially like that character who's like, I have a country.
Right.
I have
and
my own country.
Exactly. It's like, I want to go there, and it's also the way that younger people own things. And I think they own friendships in the same way. It's like, this is my friend, that becomes so immediate. And we lose that as we get older, because it's like, we don't, different life experiences, different course, we go to different schools. But in that moment where you just kind of like cling to someone so strongly, especially I think as young girls, when you're looking for like an image or mirror image of yourself, that I think it's a powerful experience that does carry out throughout our lives. And sometimes the reunions don't work out so well.
Yes.
Because the people become you become very too different to relive that childhood friendship. But other times it's really beautiful. Like I have a childhood friend. We're not in touch all the time, but when we see each other, it's like no time has
Nothing's
gone
changed.
by.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that's exactly how it was when I came back. I was in New York for 7 years. And when the pandemic came back and I'm calling people and telling them I'm back, I'm talking to them for 3 or 4 hours on the phone, like we just saw each other. And it's those connections. When I was reading Seven Stories, and I was thinking about how it's not the moments, it's the moments inside the time and not the time inside the moment. And so it was only just a little bit of time,
I know.
but the moments that they had within that time, it carried them into adulthood till she's married, and now she's inviting her, and she came into her life. Kim came into Callie's life.
Yeah.
At the exact moment where she needed a friend, right? She witnessed this trauma with the trauma of her father, but also the trauma of her mom getting on the plane, and just to have somebody and then have that connection. Because I know there's always sometimes I think about like, oh, I wonder what they're doing now,
right?
Or I wonder who, and that story was one of my favorites. One, because the way that she described her country. The gold beaches, the pink sand.
Yes.
And I was like, man, I want to go to that. What really is
it's
that?
Just like, I shouldn't be here. I need to be. Yes.
And also the full spectrum of seeing her as the story within the story. It was like, it's a story of this little girl, but it also had it's like, oh, where are they now? Well, one's a writer and one is the wife of a prime minister. And so I really I'm not the biggest reader, so I love this book club. And I was telling my wife Lindsay, I said short stories is the best thing for me, because I can one, I can get it and go, and two, this is going to lead me to my question. I could get a story and I could finish, and I make my own endings sometimes because the stories are so short. And I noticed on a couple of your stories, it's like, okay, this is the end of the story, but the story didn't end. And I wanted to know the reasons behind that, because I was just making up my own endings.
That's what you're supposed to do. I think, short stories are great for, the modern reader, because sometimes there's so much happening in our lives, and we're so used to reading in bits. That's one of the things I love about reading them too, and writing them. So, but I do think, I think of it as like a painting or a photograph, right? When you look at one of you could think of any of these iconic photographs, and when you look at them, you're absorbed, you fall into it, you're captivated, and that there's something that happened before that photograph was taken, and there's something that happens after, but in that moment, you're just really captivated by it. So I think of short stories that way. And someone once said that a short story is like a date, and a novel is like a marriage.
I see that.
So it's I guess it's kind of like speed dating. Especially if you're really busy, you don't have time to read too much. So I like them for that too. And then that when you sit, you're like, at least I'll finish this one story. But that story, Seven Stories, it's in a way also about stories, like how we tell, what stories we tell ourselves, right? About things that happen to us. And the interesting thing now, and I thought about it when I was writing the story, if I wonder about anything that happened to someone I went to high school with, I can just Google them.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there will be something either, in some social media. So in a way, that mystery, that wondering it's a really rare person that you won't be able to find somewhere online. And I know people who, you know, I'm probably easier to find because I'm, you know, of the books and everything, but I know people who are hearing from people they went to elementary school with, like on Facebook.
Yes.
So there is that other, you know, that I didn't want to, you know, like I had to address because it's in a modern time. You know, it's like someone says, when you read old mysteries, a lot of those mysteries would be easily solved by a Google.
Right, they don't relate anymore. Yes. No, for sure. I heard it because you actually mentioned podcasts in that story as well. And I was podcasts? Like,
oh yeah, no, I love. You know what's great about podcasts? I grew up like in Haiti in a culture of radio. So they had we grew up listening to radio plays, you know, like whether it was Christian stories or just like comedy stories. So for me, podcasts, it feels so full circle. Like it's part of like oral culture, like how we grew up. And it's really, so we had over spring break with my girls, we did a very long drive and we just listened to podcasts. You know, and so it's a very, it feels kind of like our grandma's way of listening to the radio, but it's wonderful too that people are willing to listen at a time where there's so much else to catch their attention. It also shows, you know, the power of the medium.
Right.
And how everybody can add their own to it, like you two are doing.
Yes, I think I sold you on the podcast because I listen to podcasts because I like usually I listen to sports because I love sports, but then sports goes into sports documentaries. And so now I'm listening to documentaries, and then that goes into a crime drama where somebody got set up for a crime. And so I'm like captivated. And it does remind me of the old radios. I remember on Saturdays, my father used to play Christian radio, and it was these Christian stories. It was called The Adventures of Odyssey. And it was this guy, and we just sat there as he was making breakfast, and we listened to the radio before we went outside and played, and we didn't watch TV. This is what we did. And I didn't even think about it. Now people are listening to us like when they're on their commute and stuff like that. So it's storytelling, and now we get to tell our story. So
absolutely, and you get to tell it a couple of times a week.
I know. It's been very, very good for us during this time, especially just a growing experience altogether and merging what we both love to do, because I love to read. And so, you know, Aaron was willing to, I said, let's start a book club. Let's do this. And I just picked books that I thought would be great to read, not really knowing much about them. That's how much I like. I gravitate towards fiction, but I prefer anything. I prefer mysteries usually, which is why your books are so great, because the end is a mystery. The very first story, Dosas, I wonder if you can tell me, how do you feel like she played out? Because it's really like there's a quote, there's a line in the book about love. Some marriages are detours, and our podcast is about healthy relationships and marriage. And so I said, you know, yes, not every marriage is forever. And here she is. She kind of did she meet her love in the end? Like, was that her love? Because I was hoping that he was a good guy, and she met him, and it was a good thing. So.
Yeah, I am too.
You can tell me.
Ultimately, no, I think it will work out. I'll reassure you. Okay. I mean, I think the thing is, you've probably discussed marriage more because of the nature of your podcast. But I just remember being newly married, and then you feel like you have to have a certain kind of marriage before it was like the movies, like the way people are in movies.
Yes.
And I feel like poor men sometimes, like your partner suffers from it because you're like, why can't you be like Denzel? Or,
yes.
Why can't gets to just read my mind.
All of the romantic comedies that we know.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then I had a friend who used to say, remember, we were raised by soap operas. So we also feel like, in my time, like there should be drama.
Yes, absolutely. And you keep it spicy, and it's just
exactly.
yes, all of the things that we're told.
Yeah. So I think so this woman too was just like, her marriage, in a way, she was a kind of marriage of convenience, right? In that it's like two very lonely people who might hope one day they'll like get each other's papers, but she grew to love this man. And the way love, is messy, and all of a sudden, I think it was helpful for her to then have, it's like, okay, different people have different kinds of marriages. Like, for me, I always thought like, I used to think like, I was like, my parents don't have much PDA in their marriage, public displays. And then I was like, oh, why don't you hold hands on the beach? My mother was like, and nobody got time for that. Where is the beach even? I'm working in a factory like 6 days a week. And so you have to, in a way, I think that's what they were adjusting to. And then, all the different types of, marriages that people have. And it's the same with mother and child too. Like in the second story, in the story, the Port-au-Prince Marriage Special, I remember when I was reading that, I was thinking of, Toni Morrison and Sula, I think, when the daughter says, Mama, you never loved me. You never said you loved me. And then she was like, I was killing myself to keep you alive.
Right.
Like what greater definition of love is that? But so in a way, I feel like all the stories are about that, like all these different layers and shades of love, and how differently we express them, and that there's really no specific book for how we display our affection. And I think sometimes we're hard on the people we love because we're like, they should do it this way, or they should, without wanting to prescribe them a script, we want them to think of it,
I understood that, because I think we talked about it 2 episodes ago, how I know some people who are getting married and I don't understand their relationship, but I do understand that they're getting married. And sometimes I see other relationships of my elders, and I don't see the love, but they see a successful marriage. So some people stay together until their kids turn 18, or they stay. And so whatever their idea of marriage is, that's their idea. And me placing my ideals on their relationship, it could only disappoint if I'm just like, oh, well, you should be going out on vacation and buying her all these things. And it's one of those things that I learned as I got older and I had more life experiences. And I wanted to ask about, because there are a couple of themes to me in the book, Everything Inside, and one was relationships. It was the relationships between mother and daughter, even with the death. What was the second one, with the death of the father?
In the old days.
In the old days. And so it's relationships between human beings, but I also felt the relationship between the main subject and the community, either being Haitian American or being Haitian. I felt like there was a real sense of community within that person, and they had a relationship with their community. And I just wanted to know how'd you figure that out, and was that one of the things you wanted to emphasize? Because I could really, I was like, man, I need to learn a lot more about Haiti, because this sounds great. Like I like community stuff. I like the cultural aspect of it, and it had me enthralled. Even the girl had pride in 7 Stories. She was like, well, I'm Haitian, and everybody stopped. And then the husband played the song and for her. And I see that
Charles
there's
Mingus,
Haitian
fight song. We have to
the Haitian fight song. I just want you to know, I murdered all the Creole and the French.
We tried. We did.
No, that's fine.
I was like, I'll get it in context. I'll just get it in context. But I really wanted to know how you ended up getting that. How how you did it so beautifully, getting that feeling of community and that relationship between person and where they come from and who they are.
Well, I think, I grew up with that sense of community. First, my parents were living here for most of my childhood in Brooklyn, New York. And I grew up with my aunt and uncle in Haiti. With my uncle was a minister. So we were really part of a community in the sense that, everybody, other people's children were your children. You shared what you had. And that maybe had come from, not having much. So you really had to count on your neighbors, and then in a way that everybody was part of, like what we call your la cour, which is like kind of like, it's called a courtyard, but it's a community, And so I really wanted to convey that in the book, and in community, just like all communities, we don't always agree. We don't always see things the same way. We don't always practice the same faith. We don't always believe that our children should be raised the same way. But what is there at core is love, right? And that we just like, I have your back if you need me, and I'm there for you, in the sense of, and what, in the second story is in the old days, is that the, where community, I think, manifests itself most powerfully is through rituals. And in a way, that's what, migration takes away a little bit, because suddenly you're in a different context. You're a stranger, quote unquote. And that's what, say, the pandemic has taken away, is that we can't bury our dead. We can't go to, graduations. We can't go to weddings. We can't go through all these very daily, weekly, these kind of routine rituals that we took for granted. These, going to church services, going to, to hold going to a wake even. Yes. So that's what, splinters community. So we find ourselves, and I've had that, to like watch a funeral on Zoom, or, or people who have loved ones who are dying in the COVID ward. You can't even be with them. You can't even comfort them. You're on a screen with your loved one. So community is, we actually miss it when it's gone. Yeah. And I think for this past year or so, a lot of people who didn't think much of, you just kind of went about your life, and you did these things, but you realize, oh, this is what community was, and now we're trying to rebuild it in different ways. You have your weekly Zoom calls, you have your drive-by birthday parties.
Yes, you just did one.
yeah, because I think human beings, like we have to be together, and it's the same, I think, in a way. Migration is similar as if you move from the South to the big city, and when you have these stories of the Great Migration, or even migrations now, or you move from a different country, that's when you end up in a new place, you're looking for community. You're trying to recreate some kind of community. So I think that's, all these characters in a way are trying to do. And then when you get to the next generation, as it was for my parents, and then you're trying to make sure your children have that, because you saw the value of it. For my parents, it was the church community, and there was the Haitian community. They really wanted us to hang on to that, because it meant a lot to them, because it also served them. It's like childcare, so that kind of support, and is you can't really even put a price on it.
Yeah, the village. That's it. And
exactly.
We talk about our village all the time, and we have a village out in New York. But coming back with our son was our 1-year-old son back in our village was like, we are ready. We've been waiting for him, because he was so far away. And he's grown exponentially in that village. And I felt like the mother-in-law, when the father died, she wanted to convey that. She wanted to convey in the old days, like, this is how we do it, because that's the next generation. And so and I really felt that, because the passing down of information, the storytelling is really key. when you have this community and you want to keep that culture going. So that was one of the ones I got. I was like, oh, is not only is the relationship between the mom and the mom and the mom and the now deceased dad, I mean the daughter and the dad, but now it's the daughter and the stepmom saying, hey, I know you didn't know your father, but this is the way that I want you to still be a part of this community. And I really, I thought that was really cool. I mean, I really loved this book. It was great.
Thank
I was like, this is a good first book.
This was a great first book. I mean, we could not have started the book club any other way. And we asked our listeners last week if they had any questions for you. So some of these questions are from them. And this one in particular, someone wanted to know about the stories were very triggering for some of them. And with our experience alone, I can, we're talking about loss and deception and heartbreak and so many things. And so they wanted to know if it's the pain that you write, if it's healing to write them, because they're reading them, right? So it's almost like a remembrance of the pain that they had. And so if it's healing for you to write these type of stories, because they're very traumatic,
Yeah. Well, I think, there are ways that, and I completely understand. And I always say to people, if you're reading something that you feel is triggering in a negative way, put it down, certainly, because, I understand that sense of trauma, and there are times when something is worded or expressed in a way that can lead you to kind of like a new realization that can be helpful. But if you feel like that's not what's happening, take a pause, take a breather. I think that's important too. For me, it's always been like writing is in many ways my therapy. It's always been healing for me to write. There's a beautiful movie, by Julie Dash, called Daughters of the Dust. And it's about, these women in the Gullah Islands, they're moving to the mainland, and it's a wonderful culture that feels so close to, African diaspora, certainly Haitian culture when I watched that movie. And one of the women in there's Yellow Mary, she says, I have a trunk, I put all my pain in that trunk, and then in a way that I can revisit it to like as I want. I'm paraphrasing. It's been a while since I've seen it, and I feel like for me that's what the writing is. And so when I have talked to women who've experienced traumas similar to the ones in my book, I will say, keep a journal. Like there's some of my books, my first book, especially Breath, Eyes, Memory, is sometimes used in therapy groups. And because the therapists who have invited me sometimes to speak, they're not traditional therapists who are like, oh, you have a Freudian issue. They deal with, with our cultures, our like traumas, and which with everything, like, and being human, but also has these other, like being Black, and brown in the world. And so, and they would say, they will have these groups, and they say the people who get better are the ones who are able to express their trauma. Right? So if you want to get better, you have to, in a way, try to even to yourself in your journal. So for me, that's really, writing was very healing for me. So living through, not just the journaling and other kinds of writing, but writing these stories in a way, for me, they release the trauma, and it's a way of, like, in a way, solving some issues, even if not, it's like, people always tell me I don't have that many happy endings. but I, at least some things are worked through.
Right. Yeah. And also because I always feel like your endings can change. I mean, the past has happened, but like the last story really resonated with me, Without Inspection. And this woman, as a wife, as a mother, and as the man is dying in the cement block, he's like, okay, he says something like loves that surpass lovers. And so I think of the woman, and her story is going to continue. So whereas we know what happened to her previously, she still has to move on with her son. And it really just is, it's interesting because the story doesn't end. And that's what I'm trying to say. It's wonderful in that aspect because it can still be written.
Oh, absolutely. I think that issue of continuity, it's the same with the stepmother who wants, like, it's like your father dies, but he doesn't really die in that way that the people we loved are always with us. So it's kind of that, the continuity. When I was thinking of that story of that, I was thinking, what would be like, I know, like my mother, who died in my arms, like she was sick and I was taking care of her when she died. There was something about looking at that face the last time where I was like, I know she's always going to be with me, and in some form that I don't even understand. Like and so that sense of just like life doesn't really end as long as you're able to say somebody's name.
Yes.
Like, my mother used to say this thing that it's like, people die 3 deaths. One when your breath leaves the air, one, when they put you on the ground, and the really final one is when people don't remember your name anymore. Yeah. So as long as we remember somebody, as long as we are able to say their name, they're still alive in some way.
Yes.
So I really, in that story, especially for someone who, the way the immigration system worked for him, was scapegoated, was erased, was, living in the shadows. But the possibility that he just like, his love lives on, like the line is like that there are loves that outlive lovers, in some way. And these people, I think is powerful because all of us, we're all in some ways like the manifestation of somebody's dream, right? Somebody willed us to be here. And that love was so strong that it happened, and so I think that's kind of the, Arnold in Without Inspection, he believes that so much that he kind of like, at the end of his life, it just carries forward.
Yes.
I wanted to say, when we were talking about like all the trauma, and as I was reading it, I was saying that you were writing all of like the deep fears that I don't want to mention. And so my wife and child dying in the earthquake right by me. I'm listening to their last breath. Like my father dying, all these things that I would deem in my brain is, I wouldn't even fathom to say it out loud, that I'm afraid and I worry about these things because they're deep, dark fears that I don't want. The man getting his arm cut off, the lady getting HIV. These are things that I feel, not only me, but other people, it's their deep fears. And you write about it so beautifully that I can actually read about it and have some sense of calm about how I navigate through the story without tensing up and thinking about it for myself. And the reality you write in, I started looking up to see if any of these stories were like true stories, like typing the names in, because I was like, it feels so real, because in my own imagination, this is a fear of mine. I don't want to slip and fall. Nobody wants to slip and fall off a building when my child is just in kindergarten, or I don't want to get betrayed and set up. And I just felt that it's not really a question. I just wanted to say that the way that you navigated through these dark fears of mine was beautiful, because I was able to read and still enjoy and not feel like I don't know, like shaky, like trembling at the end. So I really appreciate it. Plus, I'm the person who always gives myself a happy ending at the end of a story. So I'll switch it at the end anyway.
Oh, good. No, I'm glad. I'm really glad. I mean, I think about, the worst fears in a way. I remember reading a long time ago something Stephen King wrote, in that he said he was just writing the worst possible things so he could like purge them from his, you know, because they're also fears that we have, right? And for me, and it's something that I've seen sometimes, you know, the greatest fear is doesn't even, like, the thing you think is the greatest fear doesn't even happen, but there are these ways that your life can just change in an instant, right? And I think this past year, it's something that so many people, we've experienced that in community in this last year. Like, so many people have had that common experience, and they've had it together, which is really, you know, with different ways, with different outcomes. But we've shared this massive fear together, you know, as a world, really.
Yes.
So the thing is, like, if you were writing that story, and we're all still in the middle of it, right? It's like, you know, let's hope, I'm hoping for your positivity that we get, you know, a happy ending. And then, but we also get better people, like that there's some really big epiphanies that change the way we function, and then the way we deal with other people, you know, out of this, you know, communal drama, you know, trauma that we've had this past year.
I had a user question, or a listener question. They wanted to know, how'd you come up with the order of the stories? Was it like chronological? Because it kind of seemed to them that the end where he was in Miami, he was falling, in the beginning when they were getting scammed in Haiti, it was like, how did she pick her order? So
Oh, okay. I picked the order very carefully because, you know, these stories were written over, you know, over a decade. And usually when you're doing a story collection, you're like, okay, I have enough stories for a collection now. But I wanted to do the stories in a way thematically, right? And so the epigraphs kind of give a guide to it, you know, with Cindy's poem, you know, being born is the first exile, right? And then Nikki Giovanni, love is our great adventure. So I wanted it to be like a journey through, starting with the dosas, which is like a combo of a parental love, you know, this daughter who's so dedicated to her father, was trying to be, and then this marriage that fell apart, and then sort of this complicated trio that emerges, and then all the way through at the end, where that you know, there are loves that outlive lovers. So I really, and when you put stories together, inevitably they become in conversation with one another. In a way that when the stories were published individually or were written individually, they were not. So now I know people are reading one thinking, oh, this reminds me of like the daughter here, so you don't want too much repetition. My puppy's barking. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
You don't want too much repetition. You don't want, you know, you don't want to repeat too much, so then you have to pace them. I think of it, it's kind of like, you know, you could tell how old I am. I was going to say like an album.
Oh, we do albums. Yeah, we listen to albums all the time.
Yes. It's like, I don't know, it's like now you just drop like a, you know, like a visual,
yes,
or visual album. So, but there's a pacing to, which is different in this moment, because, you know, there's so, you can kind of pick and choose, right? But in the stories, I like people to read them in the order. I was like, it was very well selected for you, so you could have a journey. But I can easily see people. Oh, sorry, Amber Alert.
Amber Alert.
Oh my goodness. I can easily see people just skipping, but I think you get a different experience, but skipping around. And a lot of people do skip around when they read short stories. But I'd say read it in the order, because the order is meant to be like, you know, it's well curated for you, let's say. So you can, so it moves towards like a kind of swell to the end.
Yeah, I could say that. I was in I was in the world of everything inside. So like it seemed like even though the stories were different, they were each connected. They were in the same universe, and it didn't seem like one was way out there, and when it seemed like it was all, even though it was different stories, it was all connected some kind of way.
Yeah, I really wanted to do that. I wanted to have them, and I wanted to have 8, as you know, so that it could be like a good even number. And I didn't want to have a title story, because sometimes with story collections, when you have a title story, the title story is almost like, oh, this is the most important story.
Main focus, right? Yes, exactly.
So I wanted the readers to feel like every story was equally important in the notion, even though the idea of everything inside was, you know, covered in doses, that story.
Yeah.
But I really wanted, it's kind of like everything inside counts the same, like everything inside is important, you know.
Yes. In The Gift, I know
that's one of my favorite ones.
It really, because The Gift is really interesting, because it kind of, I said it was about adultery originally when I was reading it. I was like, oh, this is about adultery. And nowadays, every television show or every movie has some aspect of an affair or something like that, and they kind of romanticize it. And again, with our podcast and us talking about relationships, you know, that's a topic. But it's more than that, right? It's so complex. It's so much more than that. And actually, one of the listeners said, did you have some sort of inspiration with nature or animals? Because there were the birds. And so that was different, because we don't know what she was thinking. I mean, to be fair, this woman we were like, what? The whole story. It was interesting, because we felt for him. We felt for him more, even though he was in this affair with her. And then she presented this bird
with the faces,
this painting. Yeah. So just, you know, wondering if that's something that's a part of your culture, or how did you come up with that?
Well, I am extremely, I go through stages with nature. I'm not a hiker or a bird watcher or anything. Okay. People have asked me if I'm a bird watcher just based on this story. But this woman is an artist kind of looking for a subject. And I remember when I was doing research on the birds, I was so intrigued by all the things I was learning, including that one bird that flies backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, you know, sometimes I hear something like, I got to put that in a story.
Yeah.
So, and this woman who's a teacher, you know, she's an artist, she's a teacher, and I can see her, you know, like she's going through a stage in terms of like what she wants to paint, and she's painting birds. And literally, like what you said, I think the guy was like, what? You know, when he saw that. And it's also a thing about artistic expression. Sometimes it takes you to really crazy places. And so I think she really wanted, she feels very guilty with everything that's happened, and she wanted to give him this gift, what is called the gift. And then it turns out to be a kind of crazy, I mean, sometimes we do things and it's more for ourselves, right? Yes. I think she was doing that. I think she was painting that for herself more than anything, as a way, you know, because she was also dealing with a lot. She was dealing with her own guilt. She was dealing with losing her baby, you know, their baby, and this whole thing is, I think, one thing she said that, you know, I think I've heard some people express, you know, it's kind of like this thing where if you know, someone is in a relationship and you're interested in them, and like you kind of like wish the other person they're with away in some way. And then she's coming to terms with, she's like, ooh, I didn't wish that. Yes. Kind of, you know, but did I really, or did, you know, and then she's really questioning herself, like how far her thoughts went, you know, and like how far her desire went. She's thinking to herself, like, am I kind of glad this happened? And then if so, what kind of person does that make me, you know, and how, you know, how much did I want this person to have actually wished their partner dead, you know? And then we have enough love triangle Lifetime movies to know that that's a thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
And she's
But
like, let's pick up where we left off. And
yes,
it's like,
yes. But she at least, I feel like, was at least self-critical in a way, to be like, is this a, you know, is this some, what kind of love is this that would make me wish someone else dead to be with this person?
Yes.
And how far can, like, are you going to be 90 and looking over at this person and go, oh, you know, you know, this is how this love came to be.
Right.
So I think she's also coming, she's gradually coming to this realization that is that love? Like, what is, you know, is that love, or is this like some kind of obsession? Is like, and so she's trying to express it visually. And I think it sort of coincided with the fact that she was also creating birds. But the mismatch of, like, the visual dissonance of her painting is in a way a reflection of her internal dissonance, and like, okay, who did I, like, who she thought she was and who she thinks she is now after this whole experience. And if she has a relationship with this person going forward, like, what will it be like given how they came to be together?
I was thinking that the bird flying backwards was her trying to go back in time and saying, like, if I can go backwards, I would try to change things. Like, I was telling Lindsay how much I usually don't like the man who cheats on a wife in a story. I'm just like, okay, you're the bad guy.
Right.
But in this story, I was like, he is a sympathetic figure, even though he was trying to be a jerk to her. And he was like, yeah, there were other women. It wasn't just you.
Right.
But he also had mental issues that he needed to get resolved. And while the main character was dealing with her own issues on how to approach him, how to talk to him, she wasn't really thinking about all the real trauma, the real life trauma that was going on with her, with her Mr. Mr. Right? I don't know.
Yes.
Was it? Her man.
Well, not her man.
So,
but yes.
And so when she's on this meetup, and he is the way he is now, because he's dealing with all the regret, that
the trauma that happened to him in a different,
and so that was one I laughed really hard on that story. I was just like, man, this lady, she wants him. I was like, oh my goodness, she came back, she got him a gift. And the fact that she didn't want to bring the gift, she kept the gift at home.
Right.
So, like, it was a setup, and I was like, oh man, but she didn't realize that, like, he went through something that he was like, I don't want to go back to the way it was. Like, I could talk to you later, but whatever we had, it died in that earthquake. And I just thought it was interesting that she's the flying backwards birds.
She wanted. I didn't even think about
of
that.
her going back. I was like, okay, well, you know, everybody thinks of flying as going forward and going towards, but if I could just go backwards,
right?
So I thought that was very interesting.
But this is what I like about your stories, because we're reading them at the same time. I like to read together, so usually, like, I'm reading to him or Aaron's reading to me, and so we're reading this at the same time, but we're having two different perspectives. So Aaron will just start laughing, and I'm like, what is funny? Or, you know, something. And so I didn't have that reaction at all. And I didn't have his perspective, but we, you know, you have your perspective as a Black man, and I have mine as a Black woman, and how I was raised and who I am now. And so it was so engaging to have all of these stories and to read them with you and then our listeners. It was wonderful. So you just brought up the gift.
Oh yeah.
Gift. Thank you. I mean, I think that's the beauty of literature in a way, and it's the beauty of reading together. And I think that's why book clubs have become so popular too. because reading the same thing and then sharing the experience of reading them, because when we all read, it's like we all have a different movie in our heads, right? Like we all see different things, and so it's really fantastic to then like share those point of views, and then someone else is like, oh my goodness, I didn't think that, or they just see it a different way, and then that adds, I think, to the richness of reading, because they're adding to like another layer to your experience. And I really, I mean, that story, more than in any of the other stories, I felt like was about someone really, like two people actually working something through in real time, right? Like trying to figure out like, oh, how is this going to end? Like, it's kind of one of those awkward dinners that you have, that people have with exes, or,
like it's over. One is, yeah, exactly.
It's like, this is going to end really well or really badly. But I think in a way, like she wanted both, she wanted some kind of closure, but continuity, but she didn't know what was going to come her way.
Yes.
She didn't know. Yeah, she didn't know what to expect. And he looked at it.
He left it there, so you already know.
Yeah, he left it there. He said you could have just drew them older.
Yeah. Well, he didn't want it. Not from her. That story was one of the best. But we could talk to you forever, I know, and I'm just so appreciative of this time with you. I think the last thing, if you could share, two last things. One is if you could share your favorite story that you have in writing, and this book in particular, like if you have one. And the second is if you have any encouraging words for future writers or writers that are looking to you.
Okay, so one of the things I love most about writing, and I always say to people, is that like being a writer is one of the great advantages of it is that you get to find out what happens first in a story. Yes. And so for me, that's just like the watching the development of just watching something blossom from like just a seed of an idea is so beautiful when you finish, and you're like, oh, and sometimes you end up in a place that you didn't think you would end up. So for me, that's really beautiful. And then, then to see the work travel, the fact that, that through this book, we're talking, and I'm getting to look at this beautiful couple tonight in this evening of April. There's some magic in that, which I owe to the power of language, to the power of words, and there's a Haitian proverb that says, parole gen pied, parole gen zèle. Words have wings, words have feet, back to the bird story.
Yes.
And so in the way that I think it's so powerful, especially in this time that we're living in, how like words can connect us. Like we didn't know each other before, but I'll never forget you now. You're part of my consciousness now. And so I think that's the gift that literature gives us, and Toni Morrison, who I loved, as a writer and as a person, used to say that Tolstoy, the Russian writer, didn't know that he was writing for a little girl in Lorain, Ohio. Just like she didn't know that she was writing for me.
Yes.
But just sometimes, just as the right people come into our lives at the right time, sometimes the right book comes into your life at the right time. Yes. And it makes such a difference in comfort. So I would say another Toni Morrison thing that she said, I'm paraphrasing, like if there's a book that you want to read that hasn't been written, like you should write it. So yes. And I think that it's the same as with service and anything else. Like if sometimes we think, oh, I'm not a writer, I don't have anything to say, but if there's something you want to read and you're looking out there, it's not there, I would echo that advice. And then I would say, just, if anything, just do it for yourself. Because for me, that's how I started. I was one of those writers who, initially I didn't want to share anything with anyone, but I knew that it was like helping me. right? If your words only do that for you initially, I would say do it, make it a routine, like make a time for it. And often people will say, you know what, I don't know what to say. Just like do some free writing, like just write down, say I'm going to write for the 15 minutes what comes to my mind, either as an exercise. Because the other thing, and I say this to my girls, is that we're all living in a moment now that future chroniclers, future historians will be very interested in. And even future people in your family, like your great grands, they'll, when you're constantly washing your hands, they'll be like, wait.
Yes.
They will be curious about the great pandemic of 2020. So I think if you want your version of the story told, at least keep a journal, keep some notes. That would be my advice, not just for writers, but I think for all of us.
Yes.
I have a question that, because I've been murdering your last name, and I'm trying to say it right. So it's like a French accent at the end, right? So is it Danticat? Danticat?
I'll tell you my full name as my mama would say it.
Okay. Like you're about to get in trouble.
Yeah. It's Edwidge Danticat.
Edwidge Danticat.
Yes, the T is silent.
Oh. Edwidge
Danticat.
Danticat.
But it was Danticat my whole life because it's
especially in Brooklyn.
Oh my goodness. We've been saying it all wrong. Oh, yes.
That is fine. That's fine.
I would like to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and writing these beautiful words and actually sending us in this pandemic to different worlds. And I really appreciate it. It got us out of the house and in somewhere else. And even though there were some stories that were dramatic, it still brought us somewhere. And I was on these islands. I was in Little Haiti in Miami, and I was watching them jump off a boat and swim to shore. Like I was there. And so I really appreciate you just getting me out the house without even, and you wrote the book years ago, and it said you took 10 years to write these stories, but it was needed, especially for our book club. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You are planted with us. You. Oh, bless you and your family so much. And we just appreciate you. What an honor. Again, thank you so much. And I know.
Thank you. I appreciate you both. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and good luck with with the rest of the season of your podcast. It was really wonderful to chat with you both.
You as well.